Kimitzion Tetzeh Torah, Kimitzion Tetzeh Torah, Kimitzion, Kimitzion, Kimitzion Tetzeh Torah, Kimitzion Tetzeh Torah, Kimitzion Tetzeh Torah, Kimitzion, Kimitzion, Kimitzion Tetzeh Torah. Udvar Hashem Yerushalayim, Udvar Hashem Yerushalayim, Udvar Hashem Yerushalayim, Udvar Hashem Yerushalayim.
Olá, amigos.
Hello, friends, internet users and viewers. I am Hoshishai. I am an Israelite of the New Covenant. Today, we want to carry on talking about the priestly nation which God has created with our father Abraham. And this nation does its work, did before, is still doing today, and will do in the future. In our last program, we spoke about this time, about the common era, about these 2,000 years of history. What is the rule of Israel in this time? Had Israel stopped being the priestly nation? Not. What we saw was a part of our people still being Israelite, embraced the new covenant which God made with his people. And the other part, a small part, generated the rabbinical Judaism in our days, and does, and still doing, throughout these 2,000 years, a very important role in our history. Let's do a brief recap.
Shalom aos nossos internautas.
Shalom to our viewers, or shalom to whom is watching us in this course designed to the Judaism of the New Covenant. In previous program, we spoke about the priesthood of Israel, and we get unto the threshold of the New Covenant when we mentioned in Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 31 to 34, 33, 34, speaks about a new covenant, a renewal of a covenant which God will make with Israel, which consists regain the relationship with his people. And I used to say that the new covenant is a new level of relationship, a deep level of relationship between God and his people. These people that firm a covenant with God there in Sinai, when said, Naaseh v'nishma, all things which God commanded, we will do and hear, or we will do and obey. In this way, throughout the times, before an entire journey which Israel had, wherever in exile or in the Babylonian captivity, or in their stay in the land of Israel, or even in Egyptian slavery, during all these times, there were periods that Israel, for some reason, got a bit distant from God. And because of that, God brought upon us many kind of problems. He allowed these problems afflict us, but it didn't invalidate to the Jewish people its priesthood. And now, in the new covenant's time, this priesthood remains with the rabbinical Judaism by the preservation of the Torah and the Jewish culture, and in the Judaism of the New Covenant, by the belief in the Mashiach, by the knowledge and the elucidation of the prophecies. And I want to conclude this presentation with a text which will serve as a meditation during this program, which is in Zechariah chapter 8, verse 22 and 23, which says, "And will come many peoples and powerful nations to seek in Jerusalem the Lord Almighty, and will supplicate unto him." This is what
naquele
the
dia
Lord
sucederá
Almighty says.
que
In
pegarão
those
10
days,
homens
they will
de
take
todas
10
as
men
línguas das
from all
nações, pegarão
languages and
5
nations,
do
will take
tzitzit na hora
firm
da
hold in the
veste de
tzitzits
judeu e
and the
dirão,
robe of a
iremos
Jew, and will
convosco,
say, let
porque
us go
temos
with you,
ouvido que
because
Deus
we
está
have heard
convosco.
that
O
God
Charles
is with
mostra
you. It
o
shows
papel
the
do
role
povo
of
judeu hoje
the
e no
Jewish
futuro.
people, today and in the
Você vê
future.
que eu
You
gosto
see
muito
that
dessa
I
passagem
like
de
very much this text
Zacarias,
of
capítulo 8,
Zechariah
esses
chapter
versos
8
finais,
and in these final
porque,
verses.
veja bem,
Because,
se Deus
look,
tivesse rejeitado
if God
Israel
has been rejected Israel
ali, com a morte, a ressurreição de Yeshua,
with the
e
death and
posteriormente,
resurrection of Yeshua later,
endurecimento que veio de
and
acordo
with
com
the
as palavras de
hardening
Shaul
according
Hashalia,
to the
em
words of
parte,
Hashau Hashalia,
não
in
total, mas em
part,
parte,
not total, but
sobre
in
esta
part,
parte de Israel,
about this
você vê
part
que
of
o
Israel,
capítulo 11 de
you see that the
Romanos
chapter
Romanos
11
fala de uma
of
árvore,
Romans
de uma
says
oliveira,
about a tree,
e
an
fala de
olive
alguns
tree,
galhos,
and says about
alguns
some
galhos
branches,
que foram
some
quebrados,
branches that were
que
broken,
são justamente são justamente aqueles que não
those who
tiveram
didn't
a
have
felicidade
the
de
happiness
ver
to
na
see
figura de
in
o
Yeshua
Mashiach
the
prometido.
promised Messiah,
E a inserção
and the inserting
dentro da comunidade
within
judaica,
the Jewish
porque a
community,
oliveira
because the
Israel,
olive tree is Israel,
né? A raiz
the roots
são os nossos
are our
patriarcas,
forefathers.
pais. Uma parte desses
A part of these Gentiles
se torna parte da oliveira,
became part of this
que
olive
passa a
tree
produzir
and
os
shall
mesmos
produce
frutos
the
da
same
oliveira,
fruit of the olive
então, os
tree,
mesmos frutos naturais
and even the
que
natural
aquela
fruits
oliveira
that
produzia,
the olive tree
esses
produce,
ramos enxertados teriam
these
que produzir,
grafted
uma vez
branches
enxertados ali.
shall produce as well,
E então,
once grafted
nós
in.
temos ali
And then
esse braço,
we have
essa
there this
bifurcação
branch,
e essa
this
parte que foi
bifurcation,
fiel
and the part
aos
which was
ensinamentos.
faithful
Então, a
to
nova
the
aliança,
teachings. So the new
ela veio
covenant
acontecer
happened
exatamente
exactly in a
numa época que
time
isso
that
mais
was
fazia
very necessary.
e que os nossos
And our
líderes,
leaders,
os
the
líderes do
leaders
nosso
of
povo,
our people,
estavam como
were
nunca
like never before committed
com Roma,
with
com o governo
Rome,
de Roma,
with the Roman
para
politics,
trazer domínio
to
ali
bring a domain,
pacífico,
perhaps
aspas,
peaceful
mas
domain,
opressor,
but
por outro lado,
oppressive
em cima
on
do
the
nosso
other
povo,
hand,
domínio completo,
upon our people,
inclusive
a
sobre
complete domain,
essa classe,
and
a classe
even upon this
sacerdotal,
class,
né? Então,
this priestly
a nova
class.
aliança veio
So
num
the new
momento,
covenant
eu
came
acho que
in a
muito
moment,
dramático
I
para a
think,
história do
very
nosso povo.
dramatic
certeza.
to
Eu
the
quero só,
history
então,
of our people.
corroborar aqui
This is for
o que foi
sure.
dito.
I just
Vamos
want to
sedimentar
confirm
essa
with
nossa-
what was
essa- a
said
defesa
here.
disso
The
que nós estamos
defense
dizendo,
was what
alguns
we are
textos
saying
bíblicos.
with some biblical
Jeremias,
texts.
capítulo 11,
Jeremiah
verso
chapter
16,
11, verse
identifica
16
quem é a oliveira de
identifies
Deus, né?
who is the
Fala assim,
olive
"O Senhor
tree
te
of
chamou
God,"
de
which
oliveira
says, "The
verde,
Lord once
né?
called you
Formosa
a
por
green
seus
olive
deliciosos
tree,
frutos, mas
beautiful
agora
with good
a voz do
fruits.
grande
But
tumulto
now,
se
with the
acendeu, o
roar
fogo
of a
redor dela
great
e consumiu
storm,
seus
he will
ramos."
set fire
Então,
to
presta
it,
atenção,
and
essa
its
oliveira
branches
aqui é uma
will be
referência
consumed.
a
This
Israel.
olive tree is a
Jeremias viveu
reference
também em
to
período muito
Israel.
dramático da
Jeremiah
história judaica.
also lived in a
Período-
very
fim do
dramatic
período dos
time
reis,
of
não é?
the Jewish
Ele viu
history.
o
In the end
último
of the
rei de
period
Israel
of
se
the
assentar sobre o
kings,
trono
he
antes
saw the last
do
king of
cativeiro
Israel
babilônico.
seated upon
E
the
ele
throne
diz
before
que
the Babylonian
Israel é a
captivity.
oliveira que
And he
Deus plantou,
said
e ele
that
fala,
Israel is the
"O fogo
olive
se
tree
acenderia
that
sobre
God
os seus ramos,
planted.
os seus
And he
ramos,
said
o próprio
that the fire
indivíduo,
will come
o povo
on
judeu,
its
os
branches.
indivíduos
Is the
que fazem
people,
parte
the
dessa oliveira,
Jewish people, the
que é
individuals
a nação
who
de
are
Israel.
part of this
Muito bem.
olive tree,
Sobre
which
aqueles
is the
que foram
nation of Israel.
endurecidos,
About those
nós temos
who were
entendido que os que
hardened,
foram
we
endurecidos
understand
foram
that who
endurecidos
was
para não
was
ver o
hardened
Mashiach.
to not
E
see the
isso está
Mashiach.
escrito no
And it
capítulo
is
29
written
de
in
Isaías,
chapter
verso
29 of
10,
Isaiah,
diz assim,
verse
preste
10,
atenção aqui, muito
which says,
importante esse texto. Porque o Senhor
"For the Lord
derramou
has
sobre
poured
vós
out upon you
espírito de
a
profundo
spirit
sono,
of deep sleep,
fechou
and
os
has
vossos
closed
olhos,
your
que são os
eyes,
profetas,
who are the
e
prophets,
vendou
and
as vossas
covered your
cabeças, que são
heads,
os
who are the
videntes.
seers."
Então, o que significa
So
isso?
does
Que
it
as
mean
palavras da
that the
profecia
words of the
se
prophecy
tornaram
became
indecifráveis.
indecipherable?
Eles
They
liam, mas
read,
não
but they
compreendiam.
didn't
Os
understand.
videntes
The seers were those which no longer exist. Malachi was the last prophet. There was a period of silence of 400 years where there was no prophecy until the arrival of John, Yohanan, who was the prophet of the New Covenant's time. All vision has become to you like the words of a sealed book, given it to whom can read, saying, read this, he says, I cannot, for it is sealed. And when they give the book to who cannot read, saying, read this, he said, I cannot read. Because, says the Lord, these people come near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me, and their fear of me is a commandment of men they learned by rote. What does it mean? That the Judaism at the time of the arrival of Mashiach consisted by a corrupted priestly class which had no real interest in the religion, that administrated their positions based on treaties with the Roman Empire, and had already been blinded by God Himself to not understand the prophecies. The Apostle Paul says about that there in 2 Corinthians, if I'm not wrong, in chapter 3 says, when you read today the word of the prophecies, a veil remains on their eyes and they cannot see. But it is upon all Jews? Of course not. Upon those who before showed this character here. They worshipped God with their mouth, but their hearts are far from me. Those ones here were blinded to not see Mashiach, but these ones didn't represent the majority of the people. So we have here the beginning of the New Covenant, the reason of the New Covenant, and this part, which we had mentioned before in previous programs, that Israel is still being the priestly nation of God. And there was a bifurcation, one side which is still embracing the New Covenant, formed by a great number of people, which said that, which believed in only one day, in Shavuot, in the day of Pentecost, and about 3,000 made the Tevilah with a sign of acceptance of Mashiach and the New Covenant. About 3,000 people in one day, the day of Pentecost, in only one day. So this part was responsible for the continuing, the preaching, prophesying. What is prophesied? Is to preach, is to teach, is to spread out the good news. Yeshua called his Shalihim, his disciples, his apostles, and ordered them to start preaching in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the four corners of the earth. And what we can understand this geographically, but also spiritually. Geographically, like the time we are living now. The Word of God has reached the whole world. But spiritually, it's because the preaching of the apostles, first of all, reached our people in Jerusalem, including the priestly class, and after the Judea, surrounding the land, who were outside Jerusalem, and later the Samaritans, who are the Israelites, the 10 tribes, and afterwards reaching other countries around. And the rest of the Gentile world. We will talk about this in upcoming programs. Which kind of Gentile embraced the New Covenant? And why did that?
Vamos guardar isso aí, escrever isso aí, o nosso técnico lá escrever isso para nós.
Which kind of Gentile embraced the New Covenant, and why did that? This will be a future topic. Another interesting question is, where occurred, for instance, the apostle preaching? Does this preaching of the apostle was directed to the Gentiles?
Vamos deixar isso aí no ar.
Let's leave it in the air.
Ela se
Was this
dirigia,
directed
pelo menos em primeiro
at
plano, ela se
first
dirigia
to the Gentiles?
Então, mas nós vamos... Isso é
So
um
this
tema
is a
muito
very
interessante que
interesting
nós vamos
topic,
discutir
and we will
aí
discuss about
pra
it
frente, vocês que estão
ahead
nos
of.
acompanhando
You
aí,
who are
seguindo
watching or following
esse
us
trabalho, vão
will
ter
have the
oportunidade de
opportunity
conhecer
to
isso
get
aí.
know it.
Então,
So
esta
this part
parte que
who
abraçou
embraced the
o
Messiah
Messias do
and
povo de
the people of
Israel,
Israel,
lembrando que
remembering
a
that
nova aliança
the
foi
new
feita
covenant was
com
made
a
with the
casa
house
de
of
Judá
Judah
e
and
com a
with the
casa
house
de
of Israel.
Eu acho interessante
And
que
I
Paulo,
think interesting that Paul, Shaul Hashalia, he said, therefore, has God rejected his people? By no means.
Porque eu
For I
sou
myself, I am
israelita.
Israelite.
Ele
If
disse, ó, se
he
ele
has
rejeitou, por que que eu
rejected,
tô aqui?
why am I
Eu
here?
sou
I'm
israelita.
Israelite.
Ele não
He didn't
rejeitou o seu
reject
povo.
his people.
Então,
So,
Israel
Israel is
continuou
still
sendo
being the
nação
priestly
sacerdotal
nation
através
through
dos
the
israelitas
Israelites
da
of
nova
the new
aliança daquele
covenant
tempo,
of that
foi
time
se estendendo
was
através dos
extending
tempos, né?
throughout the ages.
E Israel
And
continuou
Israel
sendo
is
nação
still being the
sacerdotal
priestly nation
através daquela parte do judaísmo, daquela parte
rabínica do
through the
rabínica do
rabbinical
judaísmo.
side of the
E
Judaism,
como você
as
falou, e
you
a gente
said,
tem que deixar
and we
isso
have
claro,
to make
é
clear it,
responsável
it's
até os dias de
responsible
hoje
until now
pela guarda
by
da Torá,
keeping the Torah,
pela exatidão
by the
da Torá,
accuracy of the
pela
Torah, the
confiabilidade
reliability
dos escritos da
of the
Torá
written Torah,
do chamado
and the
Antigo
so-called
Testamento,
Old
Tanakh,
Testament,
né?
the Tanakh.
Então,
So,
essa parte
this
de
part
Israel
of Israel
também
also
continua sendo
is still being
nação
the
sacerdotal
priestly
até os
nation
dias de
until
hoje,
now.
né? E o
And
destaque
the highlight
que
is
essa parte de
that
Israel,
this part of
representada pelo
Israel,
judaísmo rabínico, não
represented
prega, não
by the
ensina,
rabbinical
não
Judaism,
faz,
does not preach,
proselitismo
does not
religioso,
teach, does
né,
not
que se
do
fizesse, eu acho que
proselytism, because
ia ter
if
uma grande
they do
surpresa,
it,
né?
Ia ter
they
grande
would
problema.
have a
Ia ter
big
grande
surprise and also
Mas a
a big
outra
problem.
parte da
But the
nação
other
sacerdotal
part
de
of the
Israel,
priestly
o
nation
outro
of
ramo da
Israel,
oliveira, a
the
outra
other
parte da
branch
oliveira,
of the olive
atua
tree
como profeta.
serves as prophet.
E a gente
And we
explicava
was
no programa
explaining
anterior que
in
no
previous
capítulo 11 de
program
Apocalipse,
of
nós
Revelation, we
identificamos essas duas
identified these two
testemunhas, essas duas
witnesses,
oliveiras,
these
no
two
capítulo 11,
olive trees
versículo
in chapter 11,
6,
verse 6.
como uma sendo
One of them
Elias,
is Elijah,
que
who
interrompeu a
stopped the
chuva,
rain,
de chover durante algum
stopped
tempo,
raining
né?
for a while,
E a outra
and the
como
other
sendo
one
Moisés,
being
porque
Moses, because
ele transformou as
he
águas
transformed
do mar
the sea
Em
water
sangue,
into
feriu a terra
blood
com
e
and
pragas.
smote the
feriu a
earth
terra
with
com toda sorte de
plagues.
pragas. Mas esses dois
But
segmentos,
these two segments,
né?
Da fé judaica.
Mantendo
one
as
keeping
tradições,
the
a cultura,
traditions,
guardião
the
da Torá,
culture, and
e o
keeping the
outro
Torah,
pregando,
and the other
ensinando,
one preaching,
não é?
teaching,
vai haver
will be
momento,
a time
Rocheza, que
that
esses dois
these two
grupos vão
groups
se encontrar.
will meet each
Nós
other.
vamos falar sobre
But
isso já
we will
já.
talk
E até
about
que o
it
senhor
very soon.
pudesse abrir aí, isso está em
And this
Malaquias.
is in Malachi,
Malaquias, capítulo
chapter
3,
3,
verso 1.
verse
E
1st,
também
and
Malaquias,
also
capítulo
Malachi,
4,
chapter 4,
verso
verse
4,
4,
né?
Malachi 4:4, and 3 first,
né? Também
also
Malaquias 3,
Malachi 3,
22,
verse
também a mesma
22.
coisa. Mas antes disso eu quero
But before
ainda
that,
mais uma pitadinha
I want
aqui,
to say a
ressaltando
little bit more
quais são,
and
na verdade,
highlighting
aqueles
which
que no
are
tempo de
actually
Yeshua
those that in
não
Yeshua's
aceitaram
time did
a sua
not
pregação
accept his
e não o
preaching
receberam
and
como
didn't
Mashiach.
receive him
Atos
as
3,
the
27.
Messiah. Acts
Pois os que
13,
habitavam
verse
em
27.
Jerusalém e as
For
suas
those who lived in
autoridades
Jerusalem and
não
their
conhecendo
rulers,
Yeshua,
because they did
nem
not
os
recognize
ensinos dos
Yeshua
profetas,
and not understand the
livros
voices
todos
of the
sábados,
prophets,
está de acordo com
which
Isaías
are
29.
read every Shabbat. This
Quando
is
o
accordance
condenaram,
with Isaiah
cumpriram as
29.
profecias.
When
Então,
then
quem condenou
condemned
Yeshua?
him, they
As
fulfilled the
autoridades.
prophecy.
Os
Who
habitantes
condemned
de Jerusalém,
Yeshua?
que aí,
The
vamos dizer
authorities,
assim, 90%
the
era da
inhabitants
classe
of the
sacerdotal ou política da
inhabitants
época,
of Jerusalem.
que não
90% were from the
conheciam
priestly
as
class who
profecias.
didn't know
Detalhe,
the
porque
prophecies,
muitos dos
because
sacerdotes,
many of the priests,
conhecer
because
a
they
profecia,
knew the
aceitaram a nova
prophecies, they
Ah, o
accepted the
próprio
new covenant.
Nicodemos,
Nicodemus
sábio, né?
himself,
E depois, mais
a
pra
sage
frente,
of
em
that
Atos, vai dizer
time,
que muitos
and often in
sacerdotes
Acts, will said
obedeciam à
that
fé,
many
não é isso?
priests
Então, quer
obeyed
dizer,
the
mesmo
faith,
a classe
isn't it?
sacerdotal não estava
So
completamente
even the priestly
minada,
class was not
né?
fully
Assim como
involved,
na época dos
as the
Macabeus,
same
lá,
in the
quando-
Maccabees'
quando,
time, when
Antíoco
Antiochus
Epífanes
Epiphanes
comprou o
bought
sacerdócio, também
the
não foi a
priesthood,
totalidade, uma parte
wasn't
deles
all,
mantiveram
a part of
fiéis.
them remained
E essa parte
faithful,
que manteve
And this part who remained faithful was the part who believed in Mashiach. So let's talk about the two witnesses, okay?
Continue conosco.
So
no
stay
próximo.
with us into the next session. This is the Or Teshuvah program. Enjoy the good times of our worship dancing.
Regozija, filha de Sião, rejubila, Israel, canta e dança de todo o coração, filha de Jerusalém. O Senhor levou tuas dívidas para teus inimigos, Rei de Israel, Senhor de tudo, em nosso meio, és poderoso, regozija, filha de Sião, rejubila, Israel, canta e dança de todo o coração, filha de Jerusalém. O Senhor teu Deus poderoso é para te salvar, te deleitará.
Continuando
Carry
então
on
nosso
with
programa,
our program.
nós estamos
We are
nos
talking
referindo às duas
about the two
testemunhas,
witnesses
né, como sendo
as being
Israel,
Israel,
representado
represented by
por Elias,
Elijah,
profeta
the
Elias,
prophet
e
Elijah,
representado por
and the
Moisés.
other represented by
Moisés,
Moses.
judaísmo
Moses
rabínico,
is the rabbinical
mantendo as
Judaism,
nossas
keeping our
tradições,
traditions,
mantendo a cultura
keeping
e
the
mantendo,
culture, and
sobretudo,
keeping above
a
all the
confiabilidade
reliability
na Torá
in the
e a
Torah and the
confiabilidade
reliability
nos escritos
in the sacred writings
sagrados do Tanakh.
of the Tanakh.
E
And
Elias,
Elijah,
represented
represented
israelitas
by the
que
Israelites
anunciam
who
a nova aliança
announced
até
the
o
new
dia de
covenant
hoje,
unto the
que são
present days,
responsáveis pela
and they are the
pregação,
responsible for the preaching,
o anúncio das
for the
profecias,
announcement of the
pelo
prophecies,
anúncio do reino
and the
vindouro.
announcement of the
Nós
world
temos,
to come.
eu perguntava para o
We
Roshi
have,
Ezra com
and I was
respeito,
asking to
se
Roshi
futuramente,
Ezra
Roshi Ezra,
about
vai
in the
ter
future
encontro
we'll have a meeting
dessas duas
of these
partes
two parts
de
of Israel,
nação
Israel the
sacerdotal,
priestly nation,
se isso está previsto na
this
escritura
is
no encontro.
Está
foreseen
nós vamos
in
ler
the
agora
scriptures.
texto, então, que
It
está
is,
no
and
livro
we
do
are
profeta
going to
Malaquias,
read
não é?
now a
Texto
text
muito
which is in the
importante,
book of
muito
Malachi,
desconsiderado,
a very
infelizmente,
important
pelo
text,
cristianismo,
but
né?
very
Muita gente prega Malaquias,
disregarded,
prega o mesmo
unfortunately,
capítulo,
by the
mas não se atém a esse
Christianity.
detalhe importante.
Many
Vamos
people
lá.
preach
Vamos ler,
Malachi
então,
in the same chapter,
em
but
Malaquias,
don't
no
see
capítulo
this
4,
important
do
detail.
versículo
Let's
4
read in
ao 6,
Malachi
que nos
chapter
diz o
4,
seguinte:
verse 4 to 6,
Lembrai-vos da
which
lei de
says,
Moisés,
Remember
meu
the law
servo,
of
a
Moses,
qual lhe
my
mandei em
servant,
Horebe,
that I
para
commanded
todo
him
Israel,
at Horeb
e que
for
são
all
os
Israel,
estatutos
the
e
statutes and rules.
Eis que eu vos
Behold,
envio
I will send you
o profeta
the
Elias,
prophet
antes que
Elijah
venha
before comes
o dia
the
grande e
great
terrível
and
do
awesome
Senhor,
day of the
que
Lord.
converterá o
And
coração
he
dos
will
pais
turn
aos
the hearts
filhos
of the
e o
fathers
coração
to,
dos
to
filhos
their
a seus
children,
pais,
and the
para
hearts
que
of
eu
the
não
children to
venha
their
e
fathers.
fira a
Otherwise,
terra
I
com
will
maldição.
come and strike the
Então, o que
land
são
with
esses
curse.
filhos,
So,
o que
what
são
are
esses
these
pais?
children and what are these
Um dos
fathers?
papéis do
One of
profeta
the
Elias
role of
é
the prophet
criar.
Elijah.
O profeta Elias aqui como uma
Here
figura
he is a
profética,
prophetic
nós vamos falar
symbol.
o que ele
We
significa
are
para
going to
hoje,
tell
né?
soon what it
Um dos
means
papéis
today.
dele seria
But one
restaurar a
of his
conexão
rules is to restore the connection
o judaísmo
between the
rabínico,
rabbinical Judaism,
detentor
the
da Torá e
holder
da
of the
cultura
Torah
judaica,
and the Jewish
da
culture,
língua,
of the language, the traditions,
e aquela parte
and
do
that
judaísmo
part
que
of the Judaism
seguiu
that
crendo na Torá,
continued believing in the
mas
Torah,
com o adendo da
but
crença
because the
no
belief in the Mashiach Yeshua, and also need to restore
sua identidade,
its identity,
durante
because for a
todo
long time of
grande período de tempo, de
1260
anos,
years,
essas duas partes
these two
manter-se-iam
parts will
separadas,
remain separated,
dormentes
sleepers
no
in the
deserto, onde
desert,
seriam
where they
preservadas
would
até o
be
período
preserved
final
for the final period of
restauração.
restoration. So
Então,
it is a
uma
prophecy
profecia que, nos dias
which
que
in the days
antecede a
before
chegada
the
de Mashiach
arrival
nos
of
ares,
Mashiach
para a
in the clouds,
implantação do
for the
governo
deployment
messiânico,
of messianic rule,
essas duas
these
partes
two parts
precisariam se
need to
reencontrar.
reunite.
Não é, Yoshai?
And this is the main task of the Teshuvah, to restore the fellowship of the community of Yeshua, which was preserved with its Jewish ancestral identity through the Judaism that exists today. That is the only remnant of that identity. You read about the prophet Elijah, and I would like to read the verse first, chapter 3 of Malachi, because he also said in a different way about the prophet Elijah. I want, before you read this verse, remember that Shaul HaShaliah, the Apostle Paul, he said in Romans chapter 1, verse 16, that the preaching of the good news of the kingdom, the priority to receive the good news of the kingdom was to the Jews. And he said, first to the Jews, because I'm not ashamed of the good news, because it's the power of God to those who believe, but first of all to the Jews, and after to the Greek. There is a priority. The preaching about Mashiach in the apostolic days, it was a priority. Even the Shaul HaShaliah, the Apostle Paul, being named, also called the Shaliah of the Gentiles, the Apostle of the Gentiles, and we are going to see later that he gave the priority to our people, that he preached in every place he came, in every city he came. First of all, he was looking for, if not in the synagogue, was in the house of a Jew. He was staying at the house of a Jew, and obviously there was many reasons for it. And on Saturday, he moved towards the synagogue because our people was the priority. As he said, first the Jew and after the Greek.
Antes de ler o texto,
and before read the text, I want to ask one thing. Why the Jewish people, if the religious environment today, which considers to be the followers of the Messiah, why the world today does not give the priority to the preaching of the Mashiach to the Jewish people? One side does not give the priority, but on the other side, when concerned about it, tries to bring the Jews into a Christianism which works in the opposite direction of God's purpose to Israel, because they denied Israel as the people of God, denied the covenants which God has made with Israel, denied everything, transformed a Jewish person in a pagan person. In other words, works in the opposite. Instead of help, disrupts. As a result of this so great difference, culturally, and teachings, it makes easy to a Jewish person who does not believe in Yeshua, never believes in him. This only hardened more the heart of the rabbinical Judaism for the recognition of Yeshua as the Messiah. If before the rabbinical Judaism did not accept Yeshua, today even less. Today, because what the Christianism did with his image, the persecution of the people, all those things have to do. How comes to teach about a Messiah and in parallel harass our people because of the not acceptance, the difficulty of a Jew understands the Messiah presented by the Christianity. They decided to persecute the Jews. If they did not accept, we will persecute them, we will destroy their synagogues. But what we see, we see the work of the prophet Elijah, the work of Israel as the holder of the Torah, the work of Israel. So we see that in the end of the times, what happens if someone does Teshuvah, restore his origins, his Jewish identity, like us, the Israeli congregation of the New Covenant, this identity also needs to reflect in the preaching. Our preaching must be similar to the preaching of the first century.
Então nós estamos falando aqui em tempo agora.
So
final,
we are talking about a final
vai haver
time.
uma aproximação.
There
A gente
will be
leu aqui
an
em
approach.
Malaquias,
We
nós vamos,
read in Malachi, and we are going to give
esmiuçar
more
melhor isso aqui.
details about it.
Mas o versículo que
But
você
the
pediu para ler
verse
vai
that
fazer
you
menção,
had required to
capítulo 3
read
de
will
Malaquias,
mention
verso
in
1,
Malachi chapter
diz o
3,
seguinte:
verse 1, which
Eis que eu
says,
envio
I
meu
will
anjo,
send my
que
messenger,
preparará o
who
caminho
will
diante
prepare
de mim.
the way before
E de
me.
repente virá o
Then,
seu tempo,
tenderly
o
the
Senhor,
Lord,
a
who
quem
you
vós buscais,
are seeking
o anjo
for,
do concerto,
will
o anjo da
come to his
aliança, a
temple,
quem vós
the
desejais.
messenger of the
Eis que
covenant,
vem,
whom you
diz o
desire
Senhor
will
dos
come,
exércitos.
says
E
the
aí,
Lord
depois ele vai
Almighty.
detalhar,
And then
fala que ele será
he'll give
como
more details,
a
says
potata
that
dos
he will be
lavandeiros,
like
como
a,
fogo do ourives,
a
né?
laundry
A
soap
potata dos
and like a
lavandeiros,
refiner's
referindo-se
fire. The laundry
ao
soap
batismo de
refers
João,
to the
ao
baptism
rito
of John, about the rite instituted by Yohanan ben Zechariah, who instituted who we called Tevilah or baptism, and had the initial goal to redeem sins or to express repentance by the immersion in water, pointed to the Messiah who was at the door to appear. And the gold of the silversmith refers to the messenger of the covenant, the mediator of the new covenant, through whom the new covenant will be established, who is the Mashiach himself. And Yohanan compared with fire, I baptize you with water, the laundry soap, but shall come someone who will baptize you with the Ruach HaKodesh, with fire, the refiner's fire, which will purify the silver, which will purify the children of Israel. But this person pointed to Yohanan, a voice crying in the wilderness. This is also in Isaiah 40. But Yeshua, in a questioned word by his disciples, in Matthew chapter 17, verse 10 says that, and the disciples asked him, then why do the scribes said that Elijah must come first? Yeshua replied, to be sure, Elijah comes and will restore all things. But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but have done to him everything they wished. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands. And they understood that he was talking about John the Baptist. John the Baptist was Elijah in his time, but Yeshua said about other Elijah, which should come. John the Baptist came as a precursor of the new covenant and the coming of Mashiach and the first appearance of Mashiach, preparing everything, preparing the way. The second Elijah, the next Elijah, the next feature of Elijah also has a role of preparing the kingdom and the coming of Mashiach as the king.
E aí
and
entra
now
o papel,
comes the role, and repeating it to our friends, the internet users, our role as prophet of Elijah to prophesy and also to prophesy the coming of Mashiach. The rabbinical Judaism as the holders of Torah, as Moses, as one of the two witnesses, and the Judaism of the New Covenant, as Elijah prophesying, announcing the coming of Mashiach, and the relation of the two witnesses with the olive tree, and with the relationship with the rabbinical Judaism and the Judaism of the New Covenant, also shown proven in the book of Zechariah, chapter 4, verse 11. Then I asked, what are these two olive trees on the right and the left of the lampstand, the menorah? Again I asked him, what are these two olive branches beside the two gold pipes that pour out golden oil? He replied, do you not know what these are? No, I said, these are the two anointed ones who serve the Lord of all the earth. The Lord of all the earth here is referring to the Mashiach in his kingdom, and those who will be with him. We are going to talk about the rule of Israel in the kingdom. That is what appeared in the transfiguration. Yeshua in the middle of Moses and Elijah in his kingdom. And the rules of each one of these two anointed ones, which they will have on these days. Remembering that this text is a vision. It's written that is a vision. Yeshua was in Gethsemane.
Então ele tem
and he had
os discípulos dele o veem
his disciples seeing him talking to Elijah.
Elias e Moisés, né?
Elias e
Elijah
Moisés.
and Moses. That was a vision.
Kepha, Yaakov,
Yohanan, Peter, James, and John. He said to them, some of yours will see me in my kingdom. Well, they are not alive until today. They had a vision a few days before, a week before. Yeshua said, some of yours will see me in my kingdom. And exactly on the next week, it transfigured, and they see him with Moses and Elijah. The greatest proof that was a vision is, how did they know that was Moses? Well, if it was two ordinary people, well, probably two allegorical figures. Moses probably with the two stones, and Elijah dressed in camel skin, as he used to wear, was typological vision and chronographic vision for them to understand, and was a vision of Mashiach in his kingdom. So now, what are Moses and Elijah in the kingdom? According to Zechariah, the two anointed ones, according to the two witnesses, the rabbinical Judaism and the Kehillah of Yeshua, and according to what we will say now, the Torah and the prophecy. Side to side of Yeshua, the prophecy representing the Judaism of the New Covenant and the Torah representing the rabbinical Judaism. It's very good that each day that we talk about this seems that we learn more, even in the program. But this meeting of Elijah and Moses with Yeshua in the kingdom sealed everything that we are talking about, sealed the work of the preaching, and seal the preservation of the Torah that will be taught in this kingdom that we are waiting for. So let's come back to the chapter 4 that we didn't mention still, which says that the rule of Elijah in those days, and we believe that we are already living in this time, will be to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the children to the fathers, for not touch the earth with curse. This is one of the rules of Elijah. It means beyond to prophesy, Elijah has the task, the mission, in turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the children to the fathers. What it represents, what can we understand of this understanding? It is very important. It represents that the Teshuvah has a double role. Number one, to give back to the congregation of Yeshua its Jewish identity. And number two, reconnecting the Jewish community today represented by the rabbinical Judaism, reconnecting it with Mashiach, showing to this Jewish community the true Messiah who lived 2,000 years ago, not a transfigured Mashiach, not a Mashiach transformed into a deity or a semi-god, not a Mashiach represented by the Christianity who broke the commandments of the Torah, but had preserved it. And not was, but is the Mashiach until now. For he is risen and he is alive, waiting for the time that he should come back again. But before it happens, it's necessary that the current Elijah, and it is interesting that when Yeshua said to his disciples after he came down from the mount in Matthew 17, soon after that they asked, maybe because they saw Elijah in that vision, why did they say that Elijah should come first? Yeshua started to say about the second and not about the first, replied, to be sure Elijah comes and he will restore all things. And after he said, he came already saying about the John the Baptist. This Elijah, which will come and will restore all things, we believe we are. We believe that we have this role. This is not an arrogant or prepotent posture, may you think. You can be part of this commission of these last days, which should show to the world and will receive Mashiach in his kingdom and also be part of his kingdom. Well, this is not our condition, but for everyone who is involved in this project. Stay with us. Hello, friend. Are you enjoying this program? Stay with us.
Melech Israel, David Melech Israel, David Melech Israel, David Melech Israel, Ekayam, David Melech Israel, David Melech Israel, David Melech Israel, David Melech Israel, Akai vekayam, oy 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 siman.
Continuando
Carry
então
on
nosso
with our
programa,
program.
nós falávamos
We were
aí dessa
talking about this reconciliation of fathers and children in this work for the prophet Elijah, as we said, that we feel and we humbly say that we do this work of this witness in the present days.
Converter o
But
coração
turn the
dos pais
hearts
aos
of
filhos
fathers
e
to the
dos filhos
children
aos
and the children
pais.
to the fathers.
Vamos
Let's
esmiuçar mais isso aí.
detail it
Eu falava
better.
agora há pouco que
I was saying
isso consiste no
that
trabalho
it consists
do
in a
segundo
work
Elias. Vamos
of
falar
the second
terceiro, né?
Elijah.
Primeiro
Let's
Elias
say
é
the
o
third,
verdadeiro,
because the true one is the
dois
first
outros
one,
Elias,
the physical one.
até depois
The
eu queria que
two
tu
are the
abrisse aí
ones,
Isaías
and I will
40,
ask
né?
you to read in
Isaías 40
Isaiah
chama esse
40.
Elias de
In
a
Isaiah
voz do
40,
que
he
clama
called
no
this
deserto.
Elijah as the
Quero fazer aqui
voice
algumas
crying in the
comparações, você vai
wilderness.
acompanhar comigo.
And I want to do
Primeira
some
coisa,
comparisons, and you will
Elias,
follow me.
ele
First,
pregava a
about
quem?
who preached
Elias
Elijah.
pregava a
Elijah
Israel,
preached
ou seja,
about
ele
Israel.
pregava as
In
10
other words, he
tribos do
preached
norte,
about the 10
né?
tribes of
Essas tribos
north.
que haviam
These
apostatado
tribes
e haviam
who
se
apostatized
prostituído
and
com os
whoring
deuses,
with strange
de acordo com o
gods,
capítulo
according
17
to chapter
do segundo livro dos
17
Reis.
of the
Os
book of Kings,
samaritanos, era
the
esses que
Samaritans.
Elias
These
pregava.
were whom
Assim
Elijah
como nós
preached.
também temos uma
As we
pregação
also
voltada
have a preaching
justamente para aquela
turned
parte
to that part of the
da
early
congregação
congregation
primitiva, que da
as
mesma
the same
forma
way
como
that the
as
10
tribos
tribes
também apostatou
also
e se
apostatized,
prostituiu
whoring
com o paganismo,
with the
misturando
paganism,
o culto ao Deus
mixing the
verdadeiro com o
worship
culto
of
pagão.
the true God with the
Da
pagan
mesma
worship.
forma como Elias
As the
também
same
foi
way
perseguido
that
por
Elijah also
Jezabel,
was persecuted by
está
Jezebel.
representada
Jezebel
em
is
Apocalipse
represented
como a
in
grande
Revelation
meretriz que se assenta
as the
sobre
great
as nações,
whore that
e que nós
sitteth
entendemos ser a
upon the
instituição
nations.
cristã
And we
romana
understand
que
that this
dominou a
is the
Europa
Roman
durante
Christian
muito tempo,
institution
e que também
that dominated
perseguiu
Europe
Elias
for a
na
long
figura das
time
duas
and
testemunhas
also
no
persecuted
deserto.
Elijah
Da
as one
mesma
of the
forma
two
como
witnesses
também
in the
Elias foi
desert.
preservado na
As the same
caverna
way that
durante
Elijah
tempo,
was
alimentado
preserved
pelos
in the
corvos,
cave
também a
during the
congregação de
time
Yeshua
fed
também
by
foi
ravens,
preservada no
also
deserto,
the congregation
também
of
foi
Yeshua
alimentada por Deus,
was
até que
preserved in
chegasse
the
o tempo de
desert
seu
until
reaparecimento.
arrives the time
Da
for
mesma
his
forma também,
reappearance.
depois do
As the same
reaparecimento
way
de
after
Elias,
the
o que ele
reappearance
fez?
of Elijah,
Ele fez cair
what he
fogo
has
dos
done,
céus,
he did
destruindo
fire
os
fall
profetas
from
de
the
Baal.
heavens,
Também no fim de
destroying
sua
the
pregação,
prophets of
a
Baal.
congregação
The
de
congregation of
trará uma
Yeshua will
palavra que
bring a
trará o
word
reino do
which
Mashiach,
should
e
bring
acabará
the
com os
kingdom of
profetas
Messiah
pagãos,
that will
como
end
está
up
escrito
with
no
the pagan
profeta
prophets
Zacarias,
as is written in
quando,
the book of
então, eles já
Zechariah
não mais
when they
profetizarão
no
no nome
longer
de Deus
prophesy
estranho.
in the name
Então,
of the
tudo
strange
isso, todos
gods.
esses,
All
isso
of this,
apenas
and I
alguns
just
detalhes,
mentioned few
comparam
details,
a congregação
compare
primitiva
the
com a
primitive
figura do
congregation
profeta Elias.
with the figure of the
Falando
prophet
ainda sobre
Elijah.
essa
And still
aproximação,
talking about this
papel
approach, is the role of the prophet Elijah, among others, brings that rapprochement. For instance, how the congregation of Yeshua, and we believe to be part of it, the remainder of this congregation could reapproach of the Jewish people through the rabbinical Judaism without making Teshuvah. Would be impossible. That's why it must restore all things, start from its own identity. If I stay far from my father and I want to be meet him again, what can I do? This Teshuvah that happens with us, it serves for so many things. For instance, one of those is the rescue of our identity, Jewish identity. We have to understand that, for example, when our people was in the Babylonian captivity for 70 years, our people lost so many of its identity. And in the end, the people got married with Babylonian women, and when they made the restoration, the reconstruction of the temple, the reconstruction of Jerusalem, our people had to do a teshuvah, had to left behind so many things that they had assimilated in Babylon, gave up for all of those things for to be able to worship and serve truly the Lord. So our Teshuvah is serving for this. Our returning of Jewishness is qualifying us, is approaching us to God and giving us conditions to talk with our people. But in the prophecy of Malachi says that we'll turn the fathers to the children. We understand that fathers are our people who is the rabbinical Judaism, are those who preserved, are those oldest ones, and children like us who came after. How can our children talk to our father? You see, I had followed on the television and read on the internet and news that many times the missionaries, especially the Christian missionaries, who are sent to countries of the East and also to African countries which Islam dominates. Many of these Christian missionaries are killed, and many of those who converted there also are killed. And of course, we don't approve this. For instance, but what we notice within the Islamic religion, a person comes there, present a trinity of gods. This is unacceptable to a Muslim person. Go there and start to present different costumes and cultures, taking sensuality even in the Christianism, because the Western culture does not carry with it the same virtual modesty that the Islam lives, and even the Jewish people. So what happens? When they get into these countries, they start to be persecuted. It's not because it's a new religion. It's because what they will teach to a people that traditionally lives a different way of life, and I would say much closer to the Jewish faith and the Yeshua's faith than the Christianity itself. And unlike what happens when the preaching happens among the people of Israel, in Eretz Israel, doesn't have persecution, doesn't have acceptance, but also doesn't have persecution. So then, the way that they talk, a lot of times with no offense means, the person says, I'm praying for Israel, I'm praying for the Jewish people. For what? It has an impact on the person, especially on a religious person. Because when you say that you are praying for someone, what does it mean? When you say that you are praying for someone, sounds like a superiority, because that person is in a bad situation, a very difficult situation, is sick, is in a disadvantage,
você vai orar
and
por
you are
ela
going
pra
to pray for this
pedir que Deus
person.
ajude aquela
You
pessoa a
ask
se
to
levantar.
God to lift up
Quando
that
você fala que
person.
vai orar
When you
pelo
say
povo de
that
Israel,
you will
pela
pray
nação
for the
Israel,
people of
isso
Israel,
soa
for the
muitas vezes
nation,
para a
it
pessoa que
sounds
você
many
tá se colocando
times like
acima.
you are put yourself
Muito embora não
above,
seja essa a
even though
intenção.
this is not the
A gente
intention,
sabe,
we know,
mas soa
but
como
sounds
você se
like
colocando
you
assim.
are put yourself
você vai lá em
above.
Jerusalém,
When you go
vai
to
no muro, no
Jerusalem,
porteiro,
go to the
e
Western
chega lá,
Wall,
você
and you
quer
get there and
orar
want to
pelo
pray
judeu
for
que
the
tá ali, quer
Jews,
fazer uma
want to make a
pregação,
speech,
soa que
sounds
você está
like
se
you
colocando
put
acima.
yourself above.
E nós temos
We
aprendido
have
dentro da
learned
nossa
with our
Teshuvah,
Teshuvah
que a volta às
that the
nossas
returning
raízes
to our
judaicas
Jewish
nos
roots
traz a
brings
nossa
back
identidade.
our Jewish identity,
Nos traz
brings
um
us
maior
a
conhecimento
great
de Deus,
knowledge
porque
about God,
ninguém
because no
pode
one
dizer que
can
conhece
say
a
that
Deus
knows God
se não conhecer
if
a
it doesn't know the
É
Torah.
impossível
It's impossible
alguém dizer,
to
eu
say,
conheço
I know,
e eu sirvo
I
ao
serve the
Deus
true
verdadeiro,
God,
sem
without
conhecer
know
Torá.
the Torah.
Teshuvah
The Teshuvah
nos possibilita
enables us
conhecer
to
o
know
verdadeiro
the true God.
adquirir, voltar a
Came
nossas
back
origens,
to our
nos
roots,
identificar com o
identified
nosso povo.
ourselves with our people.
Até lá,
Until there,
nós não temos que
we
pregar.
don't need to
Não temos
preach.
o que falar
We don't
para
need to preach
para um judeu.
to a
Falar
Jew.
o quê?
To preach
Né?
what?
Tem muita gente que fala, não, eu vou
Has many
evangelizar.
people who
Evangelizar o
say,
quê?
I will evangelize,
Que boa
but
nova
evangelize
você vai
about
levar
what? Which good news
para
you
um
will
judeu?
take to a
Se
Jewish
você
person?
não cumpre
If you
Torá,
don't obey the
se você não
Torah,
conhece
if you
a fé
don't
do
know
povo
the
judeu,
Jewish
se
faith,
você julga
if you
aqueles que
judge
estão
those
ali diante
who
do
are
cotel,
before the kotel,
fazendo ali as
doing
suas
their
orações, se você
prayers,
julga aqueles
if
ali
you judge
como
those
não
who
sendo
are
nada,
there as
que condição
nothing,
você
so
tem
which
de falar
condition
para
do
uma
you
pessoa
have to
Eu
talk to
sempre
them?
falo, Lucias, que a
I
gente tem
always
que
said that we
respeitar
have to
a
respect the
dos
religion
outros.
of others. We
a
have
gente
to
tem que
respect.
respeitar.
No caso do
In the
povo
case
judeu,
of the
vai
Jewish
além
people,
do fato de
Hoshishai,
respeitar
goes
a religião dos
beyond the
outros.
respect the
Se
religion
refere a
of
algo muito
others.
maior do que
It's
isso.
referred to something more bigger than that.
reconhecimento do
The
sacerdócio
recognition
de
of
Israel
Israel priesthood
para
for
todos
all those who
aqueles que
believe
julgam
to
conhecer
know
o Deus da Bíblia.
to know the God
Porque
of
a
the Bible,
Bíblia
because
só
the Bible
existe
only
graças à
exists because the
existência do povo de
existence
Israel,
of the
não é?
people of
E quando
Israel.
alguém,
And
mesmo
someone even
considerando-se
considering
como tendo a
having the
verdade,
truth
vamos
supposed
supor, nós acreditamos conhecer o verdadeiro
we
Deus.
believe that we know
Isso
the true
graças a
God.
Israel,
It's
e
thanks to
conhecemos
Israel.
o verdadeiro Mashiach,
And we know the true
graças
Messiah,
ao
thanks to
Ruach
the
HaKodesh que nos
Ruach HaKodesh, which
compreender a
enables us to
profecia
understand the
e as
prophecy
palavras
and
dos
the word of the
apóstolos,
apostles
sem
without
que
getting
isso
us
nos
involved
envolva
with
com
the
o paganismo.
paganism.
Mas mesmo nós, para
But
falar
even
para o povo
us,
judeu,
to
temos
talk
que
to the
respeitar
Jewish people,
aquilo
we
que
have
Deus
to
deu.
respect what
pais.
God
Não
given to
respeitar
them.
com que são pais,
Respect
respeitar
that they
aquilo
are
que foi dado
fathers
a
and
Elias.
what
E
was
o que
given
foi
to
dado a Elias
Elijah.
está em
And
Isaías
what
40.
was given to Elijah is in
Consolai,
Isaiah
nahamu,
40.
nahamu,
Comfort.
ami.
Nahamu,
Consolai. A palavra
nahamu,
nahamu
nahamu, ami.
significa falar com
Comfort. The
mansidão,
word nahamu means it speaks with
Consolai.
meekness.
Consolai
Comfort.
o meu povo,
Comfort
diz o vosso
my
Deus.
people,
Falai
says your
ao
God.
coração
Speak
de Jerusalém.
kindly
Bradai
to
que já é
Jerusalem
findo
and call out to
o tempo
her
de
that
sua
her
milícia,
welfare
e
has
que sua
ended and
iniquidade
her
já
iniquity
está
has
perdoada,
been
e
removed.
que já
And
recebeu
she has
em dobro
received
da
in
mão do
double
Senhor
from the
por
Lord's
todos os
hand
seus
for
pecados.
all her
Voz do
sins.
que clama
A
no
voice
deserto.
of one cry out in
Preparai
the
o
wilderness,
caminho do
prepare
Senhor,
the way of the
endireitai
Lord,
no ermo
and make
vereda
a
a
straight
nosso Deus.
highway for our
significa
God.
isso, Roshai?
What does it
Dizer
mean
a
to say to
Israel
Israel
que seu pecado
that
está
its
perdoado, que já
iniquity has
recebeu em
been
dobro da
removed
mão do
and
Senhor
has
por
received
todos os
in
seus
double
pecados,
from
dizer
the
o
Lord's
seguinte,
hand for all
mesmo
its
que
sins?
Israel, ao
It's
longo
to
de
say
sua
that
trajetória,
even if
tenha tido
Israel along
eventos
its path
que a
has
tiraram
some
por algum
situations
tempo
that
do seu
took
caminho,
for a while
tudo que
out of its
aconteceu com
path,
Israel ao
everything
longo
that
de sua
happened
existência,
with Israel along its
Holocausto,
existence, Holocaust,
Inquisição, os pogroms
Inquisition,
na
the
Rússia, e
pogroms
tudo que
in
Israel
Russia,
sofreu
and
durante
all
todo esse
Israel
período,
suffered
já
during
deve
this
ser
period
considerado como
must
o
be
dobro do que eles
considered
mereciam.
the
Fala aqui,
double of what they
ele já
deserved.
recebeu em
They had
dobro da mão do
received
Senhor
in
por
double
todos os seus
from the
pecados. Não
Lord's
cabe a
hand for all
ninguém
its
hoje
sins. It's
falar de
not for
pecado de
anyone
Israel.
today talk
Que
about the
devemos
sins
falar
the
ao
sins
coração
of
de
Israel.
Jerusalém,
We
que já é
must speak to the
findo
heart
o
of
tempo da
Jerusalem,
sua
which
recompensa
is
por
already
qualquer coisa
coming the
errada
time of
que possa
reward
ter sido
for any
feita.
wrongdoing that
Nosso
may
papel
have been
é
taken.
clamar, voz
Our
do que
duty
clama no
is to
deserto,
cry out, prepare the way of the Lord, and we are the voice that cries in the wilderness. We have to talk to our people as a child talks to his father, respecting the father, truly considering who is our father.
E quando
And I suggest one thing, when a person wants to approach
tiver
or
condição
has
espiritual
spiritual
através
condition
do
through
retorno
a returning
às raízes
to the Jewish
judaicas, através da
roots,
obediência
through the
à Torá,
obedience
através
of
do
the Torah,
conhecimento da
through the
Torá,
to the
através do
teachings
conhecimento
of
da
the
cultura
Torah, through the
judaica,
knowledge of
se
the Jewish
sentir à
culture,
altura
to feel
de
ready
poder falar
to talk
com alguém do
to
nosso
someone
povo,
from our
em
people.
vez de falar que está
Instead
orando
of
por
saying
ele,
that
peça
is
a
praying
oração.
for them, ask
Então eu
for
quero me
prayers.
aproximar de
So
você.
I want
Você
to
é um judeu
approach
que
you.
crê em
You are a
Yeshua.
Jew who does not
Olha,
believe in
ore
Yeshua.
por mim.
Hey, pray for
Eu
me.
confio muito
I trust
no Deus que você
in the
serve,
God that
no
you
Deus de
serve,
Abraão.
in the God of
Mas
Abraham.
nas suas
Ask in
orações,
your
nas suas
prayers,
rezas, lembra de mim.
remember me.
Não é? É muito mais
It's much
fácil.
easier.
Eu
I
me
put
coloquei por
myself
baixo.
under.
Não é que eu
It's
me
not
coloquei.
because
Eu
of that. It's
entendo
because I
que o Pai
understand
tá
that the
acima.
Father is above.
E a profecia
And the
fala que ele
prophecy
vai
says
converter
that
o
He will
coração
turn the
dos
hearts
filhos
of the
aos
children
pais.
to the fathers.
Agora,
So
quando
now,
eu me
when I
humilho diante
humbled
do meu
myself
pai,
before
meu pai
my
também
father,
vai se
my
humilhar
father
comigo.
will humble
Ele vai
himself with
reconhecer, vai
me.
dizer, não
He
é
will
bem assim,
recognize and say,
né?
it's
Não
not
é
like
bem
that.
assim.
Let's
Vamos
talk.
conversar. É
Is this
essa
reconciliation
que os
that
anos
the
de
years
Teshuvah,
of Teshuvah, that the Israeli congregation, so the Israeli congregation of the New Covenant are making, is this work that is happening nowadays. I want to read, and I know the time is short, and we don't want to finish this program, but in chapter 8 of Zechariah, which we cited,
que fala de tempo
talks about a time that the days of Mashiach,
no capítulo 8,
chapter 8, verse 23,
que diz o seguinte:
which says,
assim diz o
thus
Senhor
says
dos
the Lord
Exércitos,
of hosts,
naquele dia
in those days,
sucederá que pegarão
10
10
men
homens
from the
de
nations
todas as línguas das
of every
nações.
tongue
Pegarão sim
shall
na
take
orla do
hold
vestido
of
de
the robe
bebê,
of a
dizendo,
Jew, saying,
iremos
let us
porque
go with
temos
you,
ouvido
for
que
we
Deus
have
está
heard that
convosco.
God is with
Esse
you.
tempo,
This time,
o tempo da vinda da
the
instalação do reino.
deployment of the kingdom
Há essa
would
reconciliação de
have
pais
this
e filhos,
reconciliation between fathers
como
and
o papel de
children,
Elias é
as
preparar
Elijah's
para a
duty
vinda de Mashiach.
is prepare the way for
Quando
the
Mashiach
coming
vier,
of
vai haver
Mashiach.
a
When
grande
Mashiach
chamada
comes,
guerra do
we'll have the
Armagedon,
great war of
A terra
Armageddon.
entrará
The
num
earth
processo
will
de
enter into a
destruição
process
após o
of
início dessa
destruction
guerra.
after the beginning
por
of this
fim,
war. And at the
o
end,
Mashiach,
the
que será tema
Mashiach,
de próximo
who
programa,
we'll
o
talk
Mashiach
about later,
senta-se sobre o
Mashiach
trono
sits on
de
the
Davi
throne of
em
David
Jerusalém.
in
E
Jerusalem
começa o reino.
and starts
essa é a
his
outra
reign. And
promessa
this
que
is
não
the
pode
other
ser
promise
invalidada. Aliás,
that
são
cannot
três
be
promessas que
invalidated.
Jeremias fala.
Therefore,
A
are
promessa
three
de Deus
promises:
para o povo de Deus,
the God's promise
promessa
with
de Deus
the
para
Jewish
com Davi
people,
e
the
alguém
God's
que se
promise
assente
with
sobre o seu
David
trono,
about
e a
someone who
promessa
will
de
sit
Deus
on
para
his
com
throne,
a-
the God's
o
promise with
sacerdócio
the
levita.
Levite priesthood.
Essas três
These
promessas
three
não podem ser
promises
invalidadas.
cannot be invalidated.
Então, no reino
So,
de Mashiach,
in the kingdom of
no governo
Mashiach,
messiânico,
in the Messianic
cumprirá a palavra que
kingdom,
diz,
will
de
be
Sião sairá a
fulfilled the
lei,
words which says,
a palavra
from
de Deus
Zion
de
comes the
Jerusalém.
law, and the word
E o
of
povo
God
judeu,
from Jerusalem, and the Jewish
exercerá
people will
papel
do
sacerdotal
the
no
priestly
milênio,
role
ensinando
in
a
the
Torá
millennium,
às nações.
teaching the
Esse será o
Torah
seu
to the
papel
nations.
no milênio.
This shall
Agora,
be its duty
pegar
in the
no
millennium.
tzitzit
But
de
now,
judeu,
hold
né?
in the tzitzits of
O
a
que que
Jew.
significa?
What
O
does it
tzitzit
mean?
são as
The
franjas,
tzitzits
as
are
quatro
the
franjas
four
do
fringes
talit,
of the
né?
talit,
O catão, o gadol,
katan or gadol,
e que tem vários
and
nós,
has
cada
many
franja daquela
nodes.
tem
Each
vários nós. Qual é o
fringe
significado
has
daqueles
many
nós?
nodes. What is the meaning of these nodes? The tzitzit is a commandment of the Torah, which serve for a Jew, reminds about the mitzvot of the 613 commandments. The nodes of the tzitzit represents the number 13, added the word tzitzit represents the 613 commandments of the Torah. When someone holds the tzitzit of our Jew, as the woman suffering from bleeding worship, touched the fringe of Yeshua's garment, as the same way an impure Gentile who wants to know God and wants to live from his impurity, touched the tzitzit of a Jew through the knowledge of the Torah, he starts to know God. So these nodes represents the Torah. The 613 commandments, it means that in the world to come, in the days of the Mashiach,
o povo judeu
the Jewish people will teach the Torah to the nations.
Não é? Vai então continuar
It
o
would
papel
continue
de
doing the
nação
rule as the
sacerdotal.
priestly nation.
Continue
Stay
conosco.
with us. If you like this program, you can see the information on the screen.
בטרם כל יציר נברא נעשה בחפצו כל
www.israelitas.com.br
אחרי ככלות הכל
Israeli Congregation of the New Covenant.
ימלוך נורא והוא היה
Curitiba, Paraná, Brazil.
והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם השם מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת עשה בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי